Good evening, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to the cathedral this evening. It's wonderful to see you all. I was just having a little conversation with Ben and saying that you're walking in the footsteps of thousands of other people. We've just topped 100,000 visitors to Dippy this week, so I think actually 103,000 people, which is absolutely magnificent. And we're so pleased that so many people have been able to come into the cathedral and experience Dippy in this particular place, because it is, I'm sure you'll agree, such a special experience. And we're really privileged tonight to have Ben Garrod as our speaker. I think a lot of you will know that he's famous because he's on the television and on the radio, and he's the person who has the reputation for knowing everything about dinosaurs. So just now when somebody was asking me questions, I said, don't take any notice of me, just wait to hear from the expert. Just to say a little bit about Ben's background, he's an evolutionary biologist and specialises in primate conservation. I know he also likes cats, because he came to our house and he did admire our two cats and thought they looked a little bit like mountain lions, which they've really liked that, really. And so tonight he will be thinking, we'll be thinking a little bit about evolutionary processes and all of that sort of area of things, but I'm sure that the children in particular that are here this evening are going to have lots and lots of questions to ask Ben once he's spoken. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of the timing, Ben's going to speak for a while and then he'll invite questions from the audience, and then at about 8 o'clock he'll finish. There is a bookstall over here to my right hand side, so you'll be able to buy a book if you want to, and then Ben's going to be here under Dippy's head to sign books for you. So all very exciting. And perhaps one last thing I'd like to say is Ben is a professor at the University of East Anglia, and how good it's been actually for us as a cathedral to be working with the university and indeed to be working with so many other institutions in Norwich and around Norfolk and beyond. And it's been a great thing really to be working together during this time and bringing so much life into the city. So Dippy, who's been dead for quite a long time, has been responsible for lots of very vibrant life these last few weeks. So without further ado, will you please welcome Ben?
Thank you, Jane. And as Jane said, what an amazing opportunity to see such a beautiful animal in such a beautiful space, and this wonderful link that we have here between something so integral to our society and our community, this wonderful building, with one of the biggest giants that's ever walked the planet, is a really lovely mix. So as Jane said, I'm an evolutionary biologist, and my usual habitat isn't inside a cathedral, I have to admit. But actually, this is the perfect place, because tonight we'll be exploring this animal and, in many ways, taking it apart in the same way that we watch these TV programs such as Who Do You Think You Are? And we go back 3 or 4 generations, maybe 100 years or so. We're going to go back approximately 150 million years this evening, so I hope you've got time for that. It's going to be a quick, short, sharp shock through prehistory. But before I start, I've got a couple of questions. Who here likes dinosaurs? Thank you, Jensen. Jensen's one of my regulars. Anyone name a dinosaur? Feel free to shout out. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other dinosaur names? Yes, and Velociraptor and Spinosaurus, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Brachiosaurus. Ooh, okay, Patago Titan. Ooh, we got a smarty pants in the house. Okay, I'm going to come back to that one later. Anyone else? Any dinosaur names? Yes. Who? Yes. Oh, what was that one, Jane? Oh, yeah, I'll let you have that one. That's yeah. We got some good ones. Yeah, a couple more. Allosaurus, and last one. Pterodactyl. Ooh, nearly. I'm quite mean. I'm not letting you have that one. But I'm glad you said that, because we will talk about pterodactyl in a moment. I always like to warm you up, and it's important for me to see what sort of crowd you are. So before we start the very serious lecture that I have this evening, I wanted to tell a couple of dinosaur-based jokes. Here's where I gauge how to do the rest of my talk. What do you call a dinosaur with one eye? Do you think he saw us? Yes, start with a nice regular one. How do you inquire as to whether a theropod would like a hot beverage? T-Rex? That was one of my better ones. It's going downhill from here, guys. I'm not going to lie. Why did Archaeopteryx set his alarm clock so early? Because the early bird catches the worm. Thanks. Good one. And my last one, I promise. Why do you never hear a pterodactyl in the loo? Because it has a silent P. Thank you. For those of you who sitting there thinking, I thought this guy was a professor, I thought this was a serious talk this evening, there are no refunds, I'm afraid, so that's where we go with this one. Okay, I've got that you like dinosaurs, I've got that you don't have the same humor as I do, so I'm going to move on from there. Dinosaurs are an amazing group of animals, and it's one of those groups that we have studied so well for several hundred years now. And actually, the history of study of dinosaurs and prehistoric life goes back thousands of years, and we have texts from the ancient Greeks and the Romans describing these stone men like Cyclops were based on fossil records. And even when we found the very first dinosaur bones and described them scientifically, which happened to be within the UK, we assumed they were actually from either animals from the Ark or much, much earlier. We thought they were giants that used to roam the British countryside thousands and thousands of years ago. So we didn't really get what they were, but we were fascinated by them from a very early point within our scientific endeavors within the UK. It's very easy to look at dinosaurs now and go, well, we know everything. 21st century, we can send people up to Mars, we can even send millionaires up to space, but we always bring them back for some reason. But surely we must know everything there is to know about dinosaurs. No. Thank you. We don't. And he's right. There is so much we still need to explore and understand with dinosaurs. And part of my talk this evening is being very open and honest as an academic, as a scientist, and saying we don't know. There is so much we don't know. And we live in a society where we're terrified of saying we don't know the answer to something. And kids, especially this evening, it's okay not to know something, because that's what science is. Science is not knowing stuff sometimes and then plugging the gaps, doing the research, doing the exploration, or going the other side of the world or onto different worlds to find out the answers. That's the fun bit of science. So, I'm going to ask for my first slide. Who recognizes this dinosaur? Yeah. This is, oh, go on. Which dinosaur is this, anyone? Okay, all right, jumping ahead a little bit there, fine. Yes? Dilophosaurus, yes. Is this anybody's favorite dinosaur in the room this evening? Good, didn't exist. I did that once and a child burst out crying. I'm evil. If you watch Jurassic Park and you take your scientific understanding from Jurassic Park, you and I are not going to get on very well for the rest of the evening. I'm not going to lie. Jurassic Park was a wonderful film. That was as far as it goes. When the film was made and the producers and directors and Cameron wrote the script, they spoke to a friend of mine, Jack, who was the scientific advisor on Jurassic Park. And he said, we've got this dinosaur that you've mentioned, this meat-eating dinosaur, but it's not especially cool, the one you've mentioned, this Dilophosaurus. Could you tell me the name of the one that was about this sort of size that had a frill that spat venom? I said, no. Was there not one like that? And Jack, who's a paleontologist, said, no, there just isn't. That sounds cool, but there wasn't one. Okay. And when the film came out, Jack watched it for the very first time, and this thing jumped out, the frill went up, the venom was spat. Jack was not impressed. What Mr. Cameron had done was re-evaluated or redesigned or did a PR job on Dilophosaurus. Dilophosaurus was 7 meters long, really skinny, and Dilophosaurus means 2 lumps on the top of my head, lizard. It was famous because it had 2 lumps that looked like loaves of bread on its head. That was it. So they redesigned it to look cool. So that's why we don't base our science on movies. I'm going to put my next slide up, please. Who has been outside and seen the peregrines around your cathedral? Yeah, they are beautiful birds. They really are. Why have I... Kids, don't answer this one. I know... Oh, I can hear that. Oh. Adults, why have I included a peregrine in this talk this evening? I am a conservationist, I am a biologist. Have I gone slightly mad and I'm doing a different talk suddenly? They're raptors. They are called raptors, yeah? They are raptorial. Does it go a step further than that? Dinosaurs. Yeah. We used to say, and even to Darwin's in 1859, when he wrote and published Origin of Species, we used to say that there's a big similarity between dinosaurs and birds. There's a missing link, a term we hate and we don't really use within biology. But there is something there, some iconic link between the two. And then we moved on in our understanding of science and we said they were sort of like the descendants of dinosaurs. They'd morphed into them, but they were very, very different still. And then about 10, 15 years ago, we did our classification again. We looked at the taxonomy, as we call it, and we re-evaluated what it means to be a dinosaur. And we realized that the birds aren't just like dinosaurs. They're not just the descendants of dinosaurs. They're not kind of somehow maybe a little bit like dinosaurs if you squint in the dark like dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs did not die out 66 million years ago. We have about 1,000 or so species of extinct dinosaurs that we have described within the scientific community. It ranges between about 900 and maybe 1,200 different species. Alive today are over 10,000 species of dinosaurs, the birds. There are more alive today than were described that lived over 150 million years of the classic dinosaur period. That's impressive. That's really very cool. So the next time you're outside and you can hear and see your peregrines wheeling overhead and doing their cries, dinosaurs. The next time you're walking through town and a pigeon comes after your chips, dinosaurs. The next time you get your Christmas card and there's a cute little robin on the front, dinosaurs. The dinosaurs did not die out 66 million years ago. And the wonderful thing is not only are we looking and re-evaluating our understanding of dinosaurs all the time, we're describing new species all the time. So at the moment, we're describing a new species of dinosaur on average about once a week. That's over 50 new non-avian dinosaurs being described on a yearly basis. And even within the last 2 or 3 months, there are dozens that are coming out of China and across Europe and South America at the moment. So if you're young and you want to go into paleontology, or if you're older and want to go into paleontology, it's never too late. There is so much more we're learning now. But it's not just new species. Even some of those iconic species we have, like this next animal in my next slide. No prizes for guessing who this is. Who is it, anybody? Nice and loud. Triceratops. We all know what Triceratops looked like. It was this big 8 or 9 ton angry sort of bull-like animal that was a bit of a veggie, but it looked a bit tough. It was the main prey source of T-Rex. That's the Triceratops that I grew up with. Not literally, I didn't have a pet Triceratops, sadly, but this is the one that I understood when I was growing up. We now think Triceratops looked a little bit more like this. We're pretty certain that as well as having that big display and that big defensive crown, crest, and those horns at the front, it had a bum full of quills, like a super-sized porcupine. There is even some evidence and some suggestion that had you made Triceratops jump, then it had inflatable nose sacks, like airbags in a car that inflated to scare away predators. That's a new theory that's being pushed around right now. And that's Triceratops. That's one of the most famous dinosaurs out there, which has been given a whole new facelift, like the tackiest of celebrities. But it's being changed all the time. T-Rex has completely changed in terms of the body shape, going from the head high in the air, tail dragging along the floor, green, scaly and roaring, we are now pretty certain its head was much lower to the ground, its tail was high off the ground, it was feathered, potentially for over half of its body maybe, and it probably made a sound more like a goose or a very big pigeon rather than roar. Also made them cry saying that. So our understanding of dinosaurs is changing all the time too. And there are battles, almost literal battles within paleontology raging backwards and forwards, including this next animal. Where is it? Who's this, anyone? Spinosaurus, yes. Spinosaurus lived about 97 million years ago in North Africa, places like Morocco and into Egypt. This is the largest of the Spinosaur group, up to about 18 tons. These things were huge. They've been described for well over 100 years. Nearly all the bones that we first had were stored very safely in a German castle just before 1930s. So we lost a lot of these bones in the 1930s, which completely held back our understanding of Spinosaurus for well over the next 50, 60, 70 years. But the last 5, 10 years or so, so much more research has been done into this animal. Now, we don't physically know whether this thing could walk on land or whether it was a slug-like behavior as it slithered across the land and muddy shores. Was it only aquatic? And we have no idea what that sail was for on the back either. But you're talking about this very, very large predator, possibly the largest predatory dinosaur ever to have existed, that we know in many ways next to nothing about. We had relatives in the UK. Someone tell me, what was the name of the relative of Spinosaurus in the UK? Oh, that's nearly. Suchomimus was a relative of Spinosaurus in Central America into Asia. There's a UK one, begin with B. Go on then. Baryonyx. Know that one? Baryonyx. Baryonyx was found in the UK. It was much, much smaller, about 4 or 5 meters in length, and found around the Isle of Wight, where the Isle of Wight is now. And we've even found scales and bones inside the fossilized stomach of Baryonyx. So we know that some dinosaurs specialized in fish eating as well. So our understanding of how these things walked, how they moved, how they communicated, and lived socially, because many dinosaurs were social. They weren't these mindless idiots walking around. They were incredibly complex animals capable of quite complex behaviors, including maternal care and paternal care, group social hunting, and a whole range of different things that we would never have anticipated even 10 years ago. Okay, next slide, please. We get on to slightly competitive areas within paleontology, and some of my very, very good friends in paleontology have stopped speaking to each other in the past because they all want to find the biggest. Now, when I said earlier, we only know between 800, 900 and maybe 1,000 or so species of dinosaur, most of those are the biggest. The biggest you could possibly find. Now, if I said to you, tell me the name of the biggest dinosaur, I bet a load of hands are going to instantly go up. I actually saw little hands do that then. But if I said name the smallest dinosaur, I'm terrified of looking that way right now. I can almost guarantee no one knows the name of the smallest dinosaur. What is it? I'm so happy you're wrong. Oh, you're amazing. Okay, we've got a couple of very, very small dinosaurs there. There's one even smaller, though. Have you heard, and I'll tell the rest of them because they're here, so I know we're just having a chat now. Have you heard of Epidepexteryx? Should have said Epidepexteryx. Epi was this tiny little pigeon-like animal that lived in China about 120, 130 million years ago. It had big googly eyes, it had teeth all over the place, and it had long claws with 4 long tail feathers that came out like streamers. It was a weird, strange little animal that ran, we think, through trees, catching insects and maybe small lizards. But the reality is, no one wants to find the smallest dinosaur, everyone wants to find the biggest dinosaur. So, there's been some debate over the biggest dinosaur ever. Hands up if you can tell me, and adults, you're allowed to join in. I know you're intimidated right now. I know this is terrifying because they all know so much and you're going to be wrong. But just join in. It goes quicker. It does go quicker. Anyone know the biggest dinosaur, sir? Argentinosaurus. Looking quite confident there as well. Oh, because you were told by someone else. Oh, you've just grasped now. You've snitched because that's not right. I'll come back on to Argentinosaurus. If you told him that intentionally because that was wrong, well done. Anyone else wants to be wrong, adults? Or give it a go? Titanosaurus. I feel like I really have to give you the respect and everything, but I shouldn't do the whole, haha, you're wrong, but haha, you're wrong. Any more adults want to try? I'll ask you in a second. Go on then. Oh, Mamenchisaurus, and some big ones again. These are all very big dinosaurs. And I'm being slightly mean because these are all top contenders. And Argentinosaurus might be. Now, when we have a dinosaur and we try to estimate size, it's all about measuring the long bones, the height and width, circumference of certain bones in the body. And to do that, you need most of the long bones. You need the femur, the humerus at the front, and you need the femur at the back, and you look at the relationship between the two. And then it's an estimate. Now, with a dinosaur of this sort of shape and this sort of size, you'd expect maybe 3, 4, maybe as many as 500 bones in the body. We have, as adults, about 200, 206. Kids, you're born with about 300 bones. They don't just disappear, they sort of morph into one sometimes as we mature. So something that should have between 300 and 500 bones, Argentinosaurus, we've found about 20, maybe 25, 30 tops. So it's like having a 500-piece jigsaw set with 30 pieces. If you get that gift for Christmas, it's rubbish. You open the lid and there's 30 pieces inside, you want to take it back. Because you don't really know what picture's going to be. You can't be certain. You might have a corner and you think, yeah, I get that. There's something going on there, but there's lots of spaces in the middle I don't fully understand. So then you have to guess. And as scientists, we don't like to guess. Guessing terrifies us. The one word that, if you ever want to upset a scientist, just say, probably. We like to be certain. That might change, but we like to base what we understand on evidence around us. So saying, yeah, maybe, probably, who knows? That's the problem with Argentinosaurus. And some of those estimates have gone from, it might have been 20 meters long. It might have been 30. It might have been 60 tons. It's a lot. It might have been 100 tons. Too many probablys. Too many maybes. We can't be certain. But then in 2014, 15, a new discovery was made in South America, and a new dinosaur was discovered. Who told me? It was here. Patagotitan, this animal here. Now, a few years ago, I was very lucky to go to Argentina with a gentleman you may have heard of, Sir David Attenborough. Yeah, heard of here? He's all right. We went to Argentina together, and we looked at the bones of this new discovery. And initially, they thought it might be a complete Argentinosaurus, which was very cool. Very, very cool. It became even cooler when the team on the ground realized that actually this was a brand new dinosaur. Not just a new species, but the next level up of classification, a new genus of dinosaur. This was the big, big, biggie of the biggest dinosaurs. Now, actually, if we find more bones from Argentinosaurus, it might turn out to be the biggest. But until we can be certain, until we can really play with the data and actually look at the bones here, we can't be certain. Now, Patagotitan, we found 5 individuals. We were involved with this for quite a while, actually. We found 5 individuals, and we found several hundred bones. And we found, importantly, things like femurs at the back, the big long bones in the thighs. We found humeri at the front here. And we found lots of vertebrae, lots of toe bones, all the way along the neck, lots of teeth as well. Very cool. And that meant the analysis we did, the research that we undertook, we could be more certain. And the team, led by a friend of mine called Diego, realized that this animal was 32 meters in length, which is a third as long again as Dippy, and weighed over 76 tons. 76 tons. And when it lifted its head up, it was as high as a 5-story building. Now, that is not to detract from my wonderful friend here, because I do love Dippy, but Dippy was like a tadpole compared to the biggest of the dinosaurs out there. And my next slide would show you. So when you're walking around and you look, I'm trying to think what a 5-story building would be in here. It's almost to the top of the third arch high, the third gap in the building here. When it lifted its head up, it got to that parapet up there. This was an absolute giant, and we are pretty certain that Patagotitan was the biggest animal ever to walk the planet. Now, yes, blue whales. Blue whales, they replaced poor Dippy. Oh. It's great. Hope is a wonderful thing for the museum in London, but blue whales can reach 190 tons in weight. In the first lockdown, I put on a little bit of weight, I'm not going to lie. There is a link here. And when I used to go swimming, it felt much nicer because I was in the water and I felt supported. It's easy. If you weigh 190 tons, getting in the water, a massive bath like the Atlantic Ocean, is easy. But walking around weighing 76 tons is a whole different kettle of fish. Very, very impressive. So at the moment, we think Patagotitan might just be the largest dinosaur ever, the largest animal ever to walk on the planet. Okay, next slide, please. I'll get rid of Patagotitan because it's not going to steal the thunder of our wonderful dinosaur behind us this evening. So I'm just going to move on to, well, first of all, importantly, when we had this design by a wonderful local artist called Charlie Vince, who lives and works in Norwich, she said, what colour should we do them? I said, do it any colour, just go mad. Let's use probablys. I don't know, because we don't know what colour many dinosaurs were. And the ones that we do know, things like Anchiornis that you mentioned earlier, are based on feather analyses. So we can look at the feathers of some of these theropod dinosaurs, some of these predatory dinosaurs with 2 long back legs and 2 small front limbs with lots of sharp teeth usually. They usually had feathers, and we can look at those under scanning electron microscopes and look at tiny little pigments called melanosomes that look like tiny microscopic little tic-tacs that give the feather its color. And the way they're organized, the patterns they make, determines the color of these feathers. So we know that some dinosaurs were ginger, bright ginger, some dinosaurs. As a ginger myself, I'm quite happy with that. We know that Microraptor was almost the same coloration and that wonderful oily iridescence as a starling. These are one of the first flying dinosaurs. And we know that Anchiornis, this little tiny Chinese dinosaur, about that sort of size, was black-white like a magpie with a bright red face and crest. We can look at those because of colors. We can't do it with things like Dippy and Stegosaurus and Triceratops. We don't have the preservation of skin, and we're 99% certain these weren't feathered. There was a bit of a debate about 10 years ago, but we're pretty certain something like that didn't look like a big 4-legged long-necked chicken. You'll be happy to know. So in terms of colors, I said I don't know, but I like the fact that we're using colors more and more with many dinosaurs now, even if we don't know exactly what color they were, because we are understanding their social behavior. So some of the ones where we're seeing feathers and we're seeing colors, they were bright. They weren't drab greens and browns and grays. They were white and black with red stripes. They were ginger and white, like a cat, maybe. Or they were this wonderful shiny iridescent sometimes. And suddenly that brings alive their behavior in a way that many of us didn't grow up with, understanding dinosaurs. So yeah, we gave this dinosaur a little bit of a flair. Because we do know that they were social, these dinosaurs, which is important for later. Okay, let's have a look at Dippy Skeleton. Next slide, please. There we are. Superimposed over the top there, we've got the skeleton of Dippy. So I've said to you, this talk this evening is Who Was Dippy? Because I've led you through a little bit about dinosaurs. We've looked playfully at what constitutes a dinosaur and what wasn't and what was, and some of the problems associated with trying to find the biggest, the smallest, for example. But tonight I want to go through this wonderful individual behind us here, because yes, this is a dinosaur, but also this was a particular dinosaur and an individual dinosaur. And in exactly the same way that we look at individuals around the room now, this was an individual as well. Ish. I have heard the only negative comment I've ever heard about Dippy when someone's walking around, and I've heard it a couple of times now in the Natural History Museum and somewhere else. So, walking around. Yeah, it's big, isn't it? Yeah, but it's not real. I had it as a model. just walking off. Yes, it's a model. First of all, we wouldn't trust the public with something like that because guaranteed bits are going to disappear and it's very fragile. It's 150 million years old. And the Natural History Museum, as good as they are, aren't going to say, of course, take the most famous dinosaur ever. We trust you. No. It is a model. It's a model that's well over 100 years old. But actually, this model itself is invaluable. It's priceless. You couldn't replace this model if you tried now. This is more expensive than any car you might one day grow up to want, kids. This is a priceless specimen here. But it's not from an individual. When people complain, occasionally, like tongue-in-cheek, that, oh, it's just a model, it is just a model. But if I was going to complain anything about this thing here in front of me, is that it's a Frankenstein model. So I'm going to let you into a little secret that most people don't know. How many dinosaurs are behind me right now? 5? Anyone else? 10? There's some people going, what is wrong with Ben right now? I can see one dinosaur. One of us must be drunk. Yep. A couple hundred. Loving that. There's someone with no faith in science right there. Oh, go on then. 2. It's 5. Whoever said 5? Yes, here's next 5. So this model was made in 1902, and it was first put on display in 1905 in America. And a bunch of models were then made and given to countries around the world as a form of diplomacy. So in a way to make friends with other governments and other countries across the planet. So imagine right now, rather than starting a fight or rather than sending a man into space to show how cool they were, we go, I've made a dinosaur for you. Amazing. Wouldn't the world be a better place if we just gave dinosaurs to each other? I want to bring that back. I really do. Problems with North Korea? Here's a dinosaur. Ian Botham is the new envoy to Australia. Here's a dinosaur instead. Similar. Oh dear. There are 5 dinosaurs here. So when the model makers were trying to put the bones back together of the original, there's an original Dippy, which is in America still, we realized, or they realized, that it's not complete. There were bits missing. And if you're going to give an amazing gift to the head of another country to try and be friends, you don't give 75% of the animal to them. Now, I don't know what happened, but I can only assume they never anticipated that science would become so good that we could tell how many different animals were here. There are 4 different Diplodocus skeletons mashed together. And I can forgive that one. That one I'm all right with. Also, has anybody ever worn shoes of somebody else that aren't yours? And you put them on and you realize, no, these aren't my shoes, these are my dad's, or these are my granny's. I don't know why you put your granny's shoes on. They just feel wrong, don't they, if it's the wrong shoes? Dippy's got the wrong feet. Dippy has some of the toe bones of a Camarasaurus. It's another very long-necked, long-tailed, big-bodied dinosaur, but the toes don't belong to Dippy. And in fact, Dippy is multiple personalities in one. So this dinosaur that you look at here is what we call a composite. It's a composite of different dinosaurs put together. And it was never meant to be used as a completely anatomically 100% accurate piece. This was always meant to be as a gift. This is a political gift to other countries and other leaders around the world. So when we look at this now as a bunch of scientists and science enthusiasts, we have to realize that well over 100 years ago now, this was given for very different reasons. So I like the idea that Dippy has lots of secrets just tucked away there. So first of all, 5 dinosaurs. So when someone says, how is Dippy? You go, which one? Saw loads tonight. Saw 5. Very, very cool. Okay, next slide, please. Where are we? I know. Got a PhD in everything. Which doesn't always mean you know, but I do know that's a coat hanger, but thank you for telling me. Yes, there's a coat hanger. The reason I asked Charlie for a coat hanger, and she had to check that I hadn't had some weird spelling lapse in my message. Really a coat hanger, Ben? Yes, a coat hanger. And the reason I've asked for a coat hanger is because it defines Diplodocus. So I'm going to take Luke for a little journey. The wonder of science this evening. We can go on to the video maybe, if that's all right, Rachel. So you've seen the head ends where all the business is done. We'll go back down there in a second. But as you come along the tail, you get this wonderful pelvis here. You get the big section here, which is stretching down to the knees, which is for massive anchorage of the tail. So when Dippy was first put together, well over 100 years ago, and even in the Natural History Museum, the head used to be right near the floor, and the tail used to touch the ground. And some of you who are, how do I put this, mature enough in years, might remember when the tail was much closer to the floor. Anyone want to be bold and put their hand up? They remember that? You're nowhere near as old as you look, some of you lot, though. That's perfect, thank you. But yes, so some members of the audience, kids, will remember that Dippy used to look very different. We thought that the tail dragged along the floor and the head was near the floor. And actually, originally, we thought they were aquatic, or they lived in water, because they were probably too heavy to have the muscle power to keep them walking. But remember, we hate the word probably. So as we understood science a little bit better, we looked at the bones, we looked at the strength of muscles, and we looked at the attachments. And we see that this big pelvis here is in a right angle, very different to ours. Ours is like a fruit bowl shape. It holds our guts, our intestines, everything in a nice bowl area. This is very different. If you look at the shape of this pelvis, it's this weird shape. And the reason we have this is that area you can just see there is for all this muscle attachment right down the tail. It would have been a very, very static, very hard tail up to about a third of the way down. It wouldn't have moved very much at all. This was its anchorage. This was the rudder, the ballast to keep the whole thing going. The last thing you wanted was a big floppy tail like an octopus's arm. But further down, it was more flexible. Now, the reason I've come down this end and the reason I had a coat hanger drawn was because they have something really special. Now, where is it? You go along the vertebrae and you see these wonderful bones underneath. And if you look at them, you look at the vertebrae, but they're not fused at the bottom. They've got these extra little bones that sit underneath, and not many animals have these. The only time I ever see these, as someone who does lots of dissections, is in animals with very, very powerful tails. And this is what we call convergent evolution, where different species or different animals from different parts of the animal kingdom converge or come together to share characteristics. Now, I've seen this in dinosaurs like this. I've seen it in whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and I've seen it in a monkey once, in a spider monkey, and also kangaroos and wallabies. And it's these little bones underneath that aren't joined to the vertebrae. They're called chevrons. Now, if you look at our vertebrae at the base of our spine, so we do have tails that tuck into our bums slightly, and other animals like dogs and cats have tails, but you never get these spiky bits at the bottom of their vertebrae. But animals with long, powerful tails that use them for rudder or balancing or for movement have these extra little things called chevrons. Now, we can see these chevrons all the way down, 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 and you get to here. Can we zoom into that one? It looks like some silly so has just shoved in two coat hangers. That's why it's called Diplodocus, everyone. It means two arches or two beams. And it's because in this little area here, there are a couple of chevrons that look just like coat hangers. And when they first discovered this dinosaur and described it, it was the only one to have this particular physical trait in its body. And it was different enough from all the other dinosaurs because of this one thing that the very early paleontologists, a man called Sam Wollaston in 1877, who also found the very first Allosaurus. Imagine not only finding this for the first time, but also finding Allosaurus. But yes, amazing. He noticed that this was the only animal that had this, and it was unique at the time. We now know that some other dinosaurs have the same thing, but because this one was named first, we can't now go and rename it. But Diplodocus just means two beams or two arches, and it's because of this little thing right here, these little specialized bones underneath the tail vertebrae to help the tail remain in that strong, upright position. Okay, let's go back to the front, shall we? So we've looked very briefly at the tail end, but I need to start up here. So our next slide, if we can have a quick look, please, Rachel, is the head. So let's have a quick look at the head end. If you look at Diplodocus, you notice quite a lot about the animal itself. And we need to think of it as an animal. To me, this is no different to a lion or a tiger or a turtle or a monkey or anything else. It's just another animal. It's bigger, it's extinct, it looks slightly different, but we have to look at it in the same way we would any animal. It's not special because it's a dinosaur. It's just another animal, and we have to play detective and really try to unravel the secrets of what we can see within the bones, because we don't have the soft tissue, the muscle, the guts, all the rest of it left over. And when you think about a Diplodocus, it's really easy to think about the obvious things: the big body, the long tail, the long neck, the 4 legs, and the really rubbish little head. No one ever goes, oh, do you know what? I love Diplodocus. They've got a tiny little rubbish head that's, it's just rubbish. It really is. But I don't like that, and I love Diplodocus's heads. I think they're brilliant. But again, got a little secret for you. How many skulls of Diplodocus do you think we've found since 1877? Young man there. 0. Yes, you're already celebrating. You don't know that's the right answer yet. You what? You read my book? Thank you. Oh, just basking in that glow then, thank you. I'm really glad that some of my UEA colleagues are here this evening as well, to educating new audiences and young minds. Oh, wonderful. Fine, yes, we have never found a Diplodocus skull. So the cynical amongst you are now saying, well, Ben says he hates the word probably. So what's going on here? Why are we listening to this guy who's making up and part of this conspiracy theory about Diplodocus heads? We haven't entirely made it up. We've kind of worked backwards. And it's almost like a forensics case. If you turn up like Sherlock Holmes to a scene and you see there's a butler looking very dead on the floor, but there's tire tracks next to you and there's a candlestick next to the body, you can look at the tire tracks and go, well, we think that was a car, and we think it was this sort of car, it was driving this fast. You can work backwards sometimes. And even though the car's not there, you can work backwards and predict what sort of car it was, what sort of speed it was, what the weather was like at the time. So you don't always need the thing that you're looking at in order to understand the thing you're trying to look at, if that makes sense. So we don't have any Diplodocus skulls, but we do have some teeth. That's really important, because you can't have teeth like that in a really big, wide skull. It wouldn't work like that. And you can't have teeth like that in a massive skull, because there'd be too many teeth and you'd lose power. And we do have a couple of skulls from other sauropods. So there's a wonderful sauropod, which is very closely related to an animal I don't know if many of you will have heard of, unless you've read my book. Gallimiopus. Anyone heard of Gallimiopus? It's a very newly discovered, I know you two have now, a newly discovered dinosaur just about 10, 15 years ago. And there's 2 species of Gallimiopus now, and it just means helmet head. Because when it was found, the scientists couldn't decide what to call it, and actually said the bone in the skull is so thin, this thing probably needed a helmet. And that's about as far as our sense of humor goes as scientists. When you thought my jokes were rubbish earlier, we actually put that to paper sometimes. So Gallimiopus, or helmet head, helped us understand what the skull of Diplodocus might or most probably look like. And even though Gallimiopus was only found a few years ago, we are pretty certain we got this right. Now, when we look at the teeth, and you can see them if we go back in the image very quickly. Is it in the image, maybe? It almost looks like Charlie's rushed this drawing, because those teeth don't look great. Not going to lie, they look a bit wonky, a bit like she had to finish this before lunchtime. Charlie's a great artist, and it's not Charlie's fault, it's Diplodocus's fault. And actually, when you look at Dippy's teeth at the front, they're all slightly skewed, they're not quite straight, they don't really meet at the front. Humans are very weird. Our teeth don't meet anymore together at the front, and that's because we've evolved very recently to eat processed foods and lots of sugars, and we don't chew as much as we should. So where people still eat very traditional fiber heavy diets, you see this wonderful it's a tooth occlusion where the teeth meet together. But actually ours have become slightly wonky and they don't really it's rubbish mostly. We see the same thing with Dippy, but not because Dippy's diet was rubbish, but Dippy did have a really specific diet. And we think it was different to all the other type of sauropods that we know out there. So usually we see the teeth are like little chisels at the front with 2 or 3 different edges that really beautifully either scraped bark off trees or ate things called cycads, which were these very early palm tree-like things. We also had things like Araucaria, which are monkey puzzle trees, all these rough fibered plants. We didn't have flowers back when these animals lived. We didn't have grass. So we're going back 150 million years before roses. Roses were one of the first flowers we had, actually. But this is way before roses existed even. So we know they were eating very tough, fiber-heavy plants, mostly these big sauropods. But these were different. When you look at their teeth, I'm not sure if we can really see them with a camera. But when you look at the teeth, it's worth having a look. So what can we see there with that? If we can have 3 volunteers all on each other's shoulders, please, we can... I love that you've put your hands up then. I'd be thrown out of this place so quickly. Actually, when you can look at the teeth of Dippy, at the front, they're just like your fingers, but on one side, they're slightly chiseled, just like a really delicate, tiny little chisel. And for something that weighed this much, that was absolutely huge, this was 20.3 meters in length. They could get bigger, but this was almost fully grown, Dippy. They got about 26 meters, this species. Something so big, it's got very delicate teeth. So it wasn't peeling off bark off trees, and it wasn't eating Araucaria or monkey puzzle trees. I've been trying to grow a monkey puzzle tree for years, and I cannot grow them. But they are the most tough and heavy and fibrous, nasty plants. I think they're beautiful, but they're not easy to eat. I've never tried to eat one, but these big sauropods did. So things like Patagotitan specialized in eating monkey puzzles. These didn't. Instead, they went and took the most very delicate little leaves and just took these little snippets at the end and just went around very delicately taking the edges of new leaves off these big trees. And we see the same thing in Africa and other areas where you get lots of herbivores, so plant eaters nowadays. If you think about giraffes and elephants and hippos and oribi and cob and tiny little one called a dik-dik, a tiny little antelope, that sort of size, they're all eating plants, but they all eat slightly different plants in slightly different ways. And it avoids competition. And that's what we see here. If they're all eating the same thing, you're going to get these big animals that weigh up to 70-odd tons fighting. You don't want that fighting. So if I walk towards you and I know you're going to eat something different, we're not going to fight. It's like if we all went to a buffet, an all-you-can-eat buffet right now, Cosmos, whatever it's called, and we all went to the very first thing, we're going to get 100 people kicking off because you're all going to go for the spring rolls. But if one of you wants to go for the spring rolls, and one of you wants to go for the lasagna, and one of you wants to go for something else, we'd probably avoid a fight. And that's the equivalent of that. By eating different things and feeding in different ways meant all of these different species could coexist. And like I said, we still see the same thing in the Serengeti and other places today. Now, did anybody bring their shopping with them today, like I asked? You should have all got an email and I said, bring some shopping with you. You didn't get that. We sent an email out. I mean, I know Jane did. I just need someone. Did anyone bring a melon this evening? Tin of beans? Madam, I see you did. Thank you. You've got, yeah? I've never met this poor lady. I just so happen to bring my favorite melon with me this evening, everybody. Now, I need 2 strong, strapping adults who think they can lift this for a little while. Anyone strong enough to reckon they can hold this for a while? I want an adult for a little bit, if that's all right, because I'm not allowed to hurt children. It's in the risk assessment. Adults never signed anything. Any grown-ups? Sir? All I got you to do is stand up and just hold this out for a little while, please. Just one hand as far as you can. Nice, straight, nice, easy. The gentleman said easy. Sucker. And stand up and do the same thing. Nice and straight. You said easy, sir. Yeah, the arm's already bent. Nice and straight. There you go. Same. Right, I'm going to ignore them for a couple of minutes. Watch them. So all I'm going to say is watch those two gentlemen for the next couple of minutes. We talk about different parts of the anatomy, but the head is a very important area. So we can just skip forward. Next slide, please, Rachel. When I got to this one, after drawing a coat hanger, poor Charlie really thought I had gone slightly bonkers. It's like a Banksy thing, isn't it? Garden skip. It'll be at the big flower festival, Chelsea, next year, maybe. I also had to draw this because we think that these animals needed up to a skipful of vegetation a day to eat. Now, if you've filled a skip at any point with garden waste, you know just how much material is in there. But usually when we have our skip, we've got branches, we've got leaves, we've got a whole range of things thrown together. These things would only have eaten leaves. Now imagine a skip full of leaves on a daily basis. That's a lot of time and energy investing into eating that. And you've got to have two things in the back of your mind there. First of all, you've got to process that. Imagine how much time it would take to eat that many leaves and chew them and get them down. Now, we didn't have to chew them back in the time when Dippy was around. By having those slightly chiseled teeth, allowed them just to nip and pull, nip and pull, nip and pull. They were going down. Now, we have different types of teeth within our mouths. We have... You doing all right? Yeah, Warren. Not much longer. I'll wrap up in 20 seconds, don't worry. Easy. We see the different tooth morphology in humans. We have the big molars at the back, the premolars, we have the incisors, and we have the canines. We have what we call heterodont dentition, and it just means different teeth. And all of our different teeth do different roles. So our mouth is a little bit like a Swiss Army knife. But some animals have homodont dentition. It just means same teeth. And we see this in whales and dolphins, like the killer whales and things. We see it in lots of reptiles, like snakes and Komodo dragons. And it just means they're not chewing. So by having the same type of teeth all the way around, meant that we know these things weren't chewing. They were just getting them down, getting them down, getting them down. How are you feeling? Good? Yeah? Be there another 20 minutes? Yes. Happy days. Do you want to give that back yet? Yeah, I thought you would. Thank you. Round of applause, please, everybody. Now, I'm not just a sadistic monster, a little bit, who wanted these two gentlemen just to hold up random pieces of stuff from... And that's not an advert, but I'm not endorsed by Heinz, but they are very healthy and very good for you. No. The reason I asked you to do that is a really quick and simple explanation of why something that big has such a small head. And it sounds really obvious. Why is that animal? It's absolutely massive. It weighs tons. It eats huge amounts of food. Surely it needs a massive head in order to get the food down there. And as we saw really quickly, with that very long neck, with something that's a little bit too heavy, but functionally that would be perfect. Having that proportionately larger head would be absolutely amazing. And if I designed a dinosaur, I'd give it a big head. But actually, by having that lengthening neck coming out, which allows it to browse and reach those hard-to-reach places, the head would have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. It's part of the evolutionary process. And it shows just how perfectly these things adapted and evolved to the really specific types of behavior they had. Having a very small head, although it looks silly and it looks weird and it's not very easily explained until you really think about it, it completely makes sense. So actually, this thing was just going through a skip, or up to a skip full of food a day, not chewing, just getting it down into that area. And that's the next thing, because this is why, partly why dinosaurs, or some dinosaurs, were so big. Because we even have to ask ourselves, why become so big? You're just making yourself a target. You can't outrun any predators. And you need loads of food. You need so much food. It's just a waste. Why evolve to something that's more vulnerable? And actually, we think, if anyone's got a very delicate sense of sensitivities now, then listen away. We think maybe it took about 10 days by the time it had its lunch to the time it did a poo. Now, we work on about... I can almost see someone go, "You don't do that, Roger." I don't want any comment the next 30 seconds, all right? Anybody. No comments. I want this place to be silent. We take between 8 and 12 hours to eat something, digest it, and it come out the other end. Sometimes it's a little bit quicker, yes, I know, and sometimes a little bit longer. But between 8 and about 12 hours, it should be the right amount of time to go one end out the other. In fact, our guts intestinal tract is about 21 feet long. The guts of this thing just went on. We could have wrapped them from here to the back and back again 2 or 3 times. Really long, slow digestive process. A stomach that had multi-chambers, a bit like a cow and other ungulates. And it took about 10 days, we think, for the food to go through, because it was very heavily fibrous material, really tough to digest. So we think partly that's why they became so big. They were eating types of food that weren't really great. It took a lot of energy and a lot of time to digest this nutritionally poor material, but it meant that not many other things were competing with you. And actually, by becoming so big, you become too big to eat. So things like Patagotitan, 76 tons. There wasn't an animal on Earth that could eat Patagotitan. Even Megalodon, before someone says, what about Megalodon, which is a big shark for anyone who doesn't know their megs, even Megalodon, A, wasn't on land, but B, wouldn't have been big enough to take on something that weighed 76 tons. So by becoming so big, it has 2 advantages. It allows you to have big guts, which allow you to digest this poor nutritional material, but it also allows you to become too big for your predators to take on. Do you know, I've completely lost track of where I'm going now, but that probably seems like I have for the last hour. So what's the next slide? Yes, thank you. That does lead me on to my next point perfectly. There were predators around at the same time. Would anybody have liked to have seen a fight between T-Rex and Diplodocus? Yeah. Who do you reckon would have won in a fight between T-Rex and Diplodocus, anyone? Diplodocus? No one. I'll come back to that in a minute. Yep. I'd be pretty scared of a T-Rex, I'm not going to lie. They had at least 45 teeth that looked about the same size and shape as a banana that could just chomp you to bits. I'd be pretty scared of a T-Rex. It's okay to be scared if someone's chasing you with teeth like that. Yep. The Diplodocus, yeah. Diplodocus. Perfect. That's what we call a mic drop. The answer was, well, actually, even though whoever would have won, they lived at completely different times, Ben. Yes, there were at least 70 million years between the time the last Diplodocus died and the first T-Rex walked on the planet. So these poor animals lived between about 155 million and 150-ish million, maybe 145 million. So at most, they were here for about 10 million years, but more realistically, about 5. And they were here right in the middle, towards the end, actually, of the Jurassic period. We went from the Jurassic period into the Cretaceous, and that's when a lot of the famous dinosaurs came out. So things like Triceratops and T-Rex. And T-Rex only lived, the species, only lived for about 3 million years, so which sounds a long time, and it's longer than our species has been around. We've been around for 315,000 years, Homo sapiens. But these animals were around for about 5-10 million years. But they never saw each other. They never lived at the same time in the same place. They were from the same place, but actually when T-Rex walked around, this would already be fossilized. It takes at least 10,000, but more realistically, nearly 500,000 years to start to fossilize. By the time they walked around, these would have been solid stone. Completely would never have met. But when Diplodocus did walk around, we know that Dippy did have a major predator. And in many ways, one I think that was worse than T-Rex. And it's this big monster on the screen behind me, Allosaurus. It's like the panto baddie. T-Rex has a really bad reputation, but actually T-Rex, they were quite cute and cuddly in many ways. We know they hatched about this sort of size. And in fact, T-Rex tells us a lot, not just because it's a very popular dinosaur, but there's a really well-studied species of dinosaur, T-Rex. Very often people say to me, how old, I'm going on a side tangent very quickly. People often say, how old did dinosaurs get? And we say, well, we think they probably lived for the best part of 100 years, many of them. But I've used that word probably because there's no evidence for that. But we often think that being very big, very slow metabolizing animals live for a long time. We just don't have the evidence. The oldest dinosaur we know of in terms of how long one particular individual lived was a T-Rex. And she's been called Sue. I don't know why. Well, I do actually. She was named after a lady who found her, a volunteer who was called Sue, up in Montana way. And we've aged the bones of this particular T-Rex, and she was 27 when she died. So the oldest dinosaur we know of in terms of its actual life expectancy was 27 years old. Now, I reckon that as technology and as techniques improve over the next 5-10 years, we'll easily get to near the 100-year-old mark. So elephants live for over 70. I've worked with chimps a lot, and the oldest chimp we've ever recorded was 73. The oldest shark we know of is over 400 years old. There are even whales that were 270, approximately. So we know that animals alive today live for a long, long time. So we're pretty certain they could live longer. But if anyone wants to know how long or how old Dippy was when he died, we don't really know. And I say he because there are enough skeletons or bits of skeleton of Diplodocus to see two types at the same time. Now, they're not two different species because we can tell the different species apart. There were two different species of Diplodocus, but even within the two species, there's a slightly larger, stockier one and a slightly smaller, what we call gracile, or more slender one. And we typically say that's male or female. Now, we don't know which one was bigger, which one was smaller, because that often changes within different species, but we're pretty certain that this was a difference between the two sexes, between the males and females, and we think that this one being slightly stockier, more robust, is possibly a male. So very often the official Natural History Museum position is that this is a male dinosaur. We're not 100%. We're not 100% yet, because we can't actually go and check. We could never 100% say, but we think it was. But at the time of Diplodocus, way before T-Rex, there were predators around. Now, within the area, this is the most commonly found fossil of a herbivorous dinosaur, those that specialized in eating plants. There's a few others at the same time. So Stegosaurus was around at the same time. So Stegi never lived at the same time as T-Rex. But we did have that wonderful big predator. So we can just go back onto that screen, please. Where are we? Allosaurus. Ooh. I like Allosaurus because Allosaurus is underrated. It's like the Bond villain you didn't expect to step out of the shadows suddenly. It really is. The one you thought it was, it's this other guy. And this other guy, Allosaurus, was an absolute monster. Now, it was only about 9 or 10 meters in length. So if we go to the next slide, much smaller than Diplodocus. I like that I've stuck them together because it shows you the size differences, or it shows you proportionately who was bigger than who or who was smaller than who. But it was about a third of the length, and Dippy we estimate to be about 15 tons in weight. By the time we've measured the limb bones and we've estimated the mass or the body size of Dippy, we think these animals were hitting about 15 tons-ish, which is about the same as maybe sort of 3.5, 4 big African elephants. Allosaurus was just around 4 tons, which sounds a lot, but actually it's not. It was a really lightweight predator, and even things like T-Rex, which roughly was the same size, got to about 15, 16 tons, but usually between 10 and 12 tons. So it was at least half as small in terms of body size, in terms of weight, as a T-Rex. And then you have to think, well, why is this big predatory dinosaur quite light? Why isn't it stocky like a Rex? And we think these were almost at the F1s of the Jurassic. So if you've got two different types of car, you can have a speedy F1 racer that's very light but very nippy, or you can have a Land Rover. They're both cars, but they're very different cars. The T-Rex was like the Land Rover of the dinosaur period. It was big, it was stocky, you knew where you were with it. It was reliable and wouldn't let you down. These were the show-offs of the Mesozoic. These were fast, they were sleek, they were all a bit prim and proper. They were just a bit too sort of sleek for their own good. But they were strong. They were still very, very strong. And they hunted in very different ways to almost any other predatory dinosaur we know of. And these would have been the major predator for things like Diplodocus. These would have been absolutely terrible. and dominated the landscape, these predators. We think they could run pretty fast. There is a guy called John Hutchinson who was here a few years ago with me dissecting an ostrich in front of the forum. Anyone ever attend that? I knew you two had. So every year at the Science Festival, which is very worth going to if you've never been, or if you do go, please come again this year. But for the last few years, we've dissected things publicly. We did an ostrich a few years ago, we did an alligator last year, and I've got something really cool this year. Really cool. So I can't tell you what it is yet, but come along. So John, my friend, who's also a professor of what we call biomechanics, and he explores how fast animals can walk or run or swim or jump, and he's got a treadmill that he puts horses on, and ostriches, and wallabies and kangaroos. So if you become a scientist, it's not all serious. We do some really silly, crazy stuff, and we get paid to do that. It's the best job ever. So if you want to put a horse in a treadmill, become a scientist. But he actually works backwards and estimates how quick or how fast some of these dinosaurs could have moved. And for years, we always said T-Rex probably could run about 30 miles an hour. Whoa, we use that probably again. We don't think T-Rex probably could. We actually think T-Rex was a very fast walker. So if anyone's a power walker here, T-Rex was probably a power walker. So it would have gone, it would have just walked you down. It would have walked you down. It would have finally gotten you. We think Allosaurus was slightly different. We think Allosaurus was able to have very short bursts of very fast running, potentially 20, 30 miles an hour coming after you. And unlike T-Rex with those big sausage-like banana-shaped teeth that were just bone crushers, these things had very, very sharp shark-like teeth with serrations along the side. So we think they were coming up alongside their prey and disabling them with, first of all, bites to the underbelly. But we also think when they were trying to attack them, and this is a little bit gross, I'm afraid, they were using their heads like an axe. They were slamming their heads down into their prey to disable them and to take huge chunks out. And a very good friend of mine called Emily in Bristol has looked at the strength of the skulls. And even though in some ways Allosaurus skulls were light and quite fragile in some ways, when they arch them back and slam them into their prey, then potentially we are looking at something that was using its head to really do maximum damage to their animals they were hunting. So suddenly, even though you've got an animal that's much smaller, this is a real threat. So even though this was a big animal that weighed 15 tons, there was still a lot of damage that could be done. Remember, where am I going to go? When we look at this image, you can see that tail end. So when we looked at the tail end, I said that bit around the bum and the thighs, that was the weak area. That was the vulnerable area. The head's able to swing. These big legs can do a lot of damage. The very end of the tail is able to lash around. They didn't do a supersonic whip. If I have one more person tells me they know these animals could do a supersonic whip, I'm going to lose my cool. All right? There is one or two that show broken tailbones that have fused together. We see that in dogs, we see that in monkeys, we see it all the time. They're just normal injuries that animals with tails get. It doesn't mean they were doing an Indiana Jones. They just weren't, all right? I'm really sorry. There's no evidence. There's no evidence for that yet. But we do know they were able to use that tail, that power, just to do a lot of damage. We also know, although I said Patagotitan could reach up to these top archways, this one probably, I say probably with a certain element of certainty there, even though I've used that word I don't like, we think they could. We think there's enough evidence to say they could potentially have lifted themselves up onto their back feet and walked themselves up these very tall trees. Now, some of these trees were over 100 feet in height, but as they matured, we think they were walking up things like Araucaria, these monkey puzzles, and to get to the very top of them. So we think there's every chance they still could have reared up, either in a defensive position or to get their food. So they could have looked after themselves around an Allosaurus, but they had one last trick up their sleeves. Next slide, please. There were lots of them. Lots and lots and lots of them. Now, when we see sauropods, we nearly always see group living evidence in sauropods. So there are examples down in Argentina where we have huge areas of nests where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animals have come together over generations, and we can see it in the layers of sediment and sand, where they've laid eggs again and again and again in big groups at the same time. So we are pretty certain these were big social animals that lived together in herds, in the same way that we see animals alive today. And it shouldn't be a massive stretch to say, if we see cows living in herds and sheep, bless you, cows and sheep and all these different ungulates, these different herbivores living together, they were too. And we've got a lot of evidence for this now. The only weird thing with that, and again, slight tangent, usually to live in a herd and to be sociable, you've got to be pretty clever. You've got to have quite an advanced brain in many ways. And although I love Dippy, I do love Dippy. I've got a real soft, I'm a big veggie myself, so I've got a lot in common with Dippy. One thing I don't have in common is I'm incredibly intelligent and humble. Dippy may have been humble, but he sure as anything wasn't intelligent. We think Dippy proportionately had one of the smallest brains for its body size of any animal ever. So Dippy was probably stupid. Aww. Poor Dippy. But there are some things that don't quite fit with that, because we physically know. We know that whatever happened there, they didn't have a massive brain. Whatever that skull actually looked like, we know there wasn't a helmet space for this massive brain to be squashed into. But that sits alongside the idea that Dippy had some of, if not the longest nerve fibers in the whole animal kingdom ever. And some of their nerve fibers stretched from the very back of the skull to the very tip of the tail. There would have been different ones along the way, but actually these are, we think, possibly the longest ever. And when nerve induction tests have been done, I've had one of these. I broke my arm a few years ago, and they put some little electrodes there and some little electrodes here, and they fired a tiny jolt, and I instantly felt my hand. The moment it went, and 3, 2, 1, my hand's just doing this everywhere. I could feel it instantly. If you'd done that to Diplodocus, or had you gone down the far end and given the tail a good yank, we think it would have taken up to 2 seconds for Dippy to go, oh. So not the smartest dinosaur ever, and not the neurologically most advanced dinosaur ever. So instead we think to get around that by not being very smart and not being very quick, we have something called the many eyes theory. So by having lots of animals living together, you don't need to be clever if you're all looking out. If we're all facing different directions right now, we're all eating our leaves, then we can see if something's coming towards us. If all of us lived together right now, and 2 or 3 of us, if that group were a bunch of Allosauruses, and we're all Diplodocuses, if there's just me, they're going to get me, aren't they? If you're all helping me, we're all having to go into our buffet and doing our thing, they ain't got a chance, that lot over there. So, and that's what we think was going on. We think by living together, we didn't always need to be especially smart. So we don't know whether they were living in a strict hierarchy that we see with things like gorillas or other big herbivores, for example. However, you don't need to be if you're just there and you're just hanging out. So we don't know whether they had things like beach masters that we see in hippos, where there's a dominant male that lives on a beach and controls breeding rights. That's quite advanced to be able to do that. And we see deer up in the highlands who do this competition. We don't know whether they could do that, whether they were doing that, or whether they just lived in these big herds. Where you going? Get some food, yeah. Ow, he stood on my tail. Ages ago. So trying to understand how these things behaved is really tough, but it really helps by looking at animals alive today. Now, I don't know if I have any more slides. Do I have any more slides? Am I just going to... No, I've got no more slides, okay. The one thing is with looking at Dippy is the story's not over. It's all very well for this animal. It is an animal. It's wonderful. This wonderful animal to come from the Natural History Museum and hear these wonderful scientists talk about the science that's been done on not just Dippy, but so many different species. And you get this idea that so much has been done, it really has. We've barely touched the tip of the iceberg here. And not just with things like dinosaurs, with things like conservation, with things like space exploration, with medicine, with all these different areas of science, there is still so much to do. And that's what's so important. Now, we're going to do some questions in a minute, and we're going to do a book signing afterwards, and I really want to have a chat with you and see what questions you've got. But before I finish, I want to say the most important thing about my talk, and this is mainly for kids, but all of us need to remember this. Science is there for all of us. So many people often say, what do you do? I'm a scientist. Oh, I don't really do science. How do you not do science? If you've made a cup of tea and some toast this morning, you've done science. If you've walked your dog, you've somehow controlled the behavior of a vicious wolf-like animal. I can guarantee someone's got a chihuahua going, Tiddles is not a wolf, I assure you. We live in a world dominated by science. We have to engage with science. And actually, the pandemic has taught us that the more we engage with science, the more we understand science, as scary as it's been, we're where we are now, and we can sit here together because we can thank science for that, because people have worked together to save us and do all these wonderful things. But that only comes with scientists, but it also comes with us understanding science. So we all have a responsibility to engage with science, to understand science and work with science. And what's really important for me, what's really, really, really important, when I was much younger, I was told I probably couldn't be a scientist, that I probably wasn't clever enough. Professor of Evolutionary Biology. Yeah. And I'm lucky. I'm very, very lucky because I still managed to do that. But what's really important, what I want to show you and really reiterate to every young person especially, is that science is for all of you. Whether you want to study, I don't know, space or monkeys or space monkeys, then there is a job there for you. And it doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl, black or white, rich or poor, young or old. Science is there. You can do science. No one is too stupid or too poor or the wrong age or the wrong sex or anything. If you want to do science, never let anyone tell you you can't do it. Thank you very much. It's been brilliant. All right, that's enough, that's enough. Thank you very much. We've got time for, where's the time, please, Jane?
Well, it's 25 past 8.
25 past 8.
I think there's time for a few questions.
We have got time for a few questions, yes.
But I'll leave it with you to sort of...
Perfect.
decide.
Well, I'll see you all later. It's been a lovely evening. Go on then. Remember, don't be too harsh with me, okay? Be gentle. I feel like there's a trick. What's my favorite dinosaur? It does change. This isn't me being very political. It changes all the time. At the moment, I love Troodons. So I know when you saw me recently, I had a different answer. I had Ankylosaurus. But actually, it's Troodons right now. So these are these wonderful small little predators with very, very big eyes and massive brains for their relative to their body size. And we think they were very intelligent, social, hunting, nocturnal predators that lived up in the Arctic that were taking down animals much bigger than them. So at the moment, it's Troodon. Is that okay? That's perfect. I feel like I got away with that then. Okay, anyone else? Yes. You're making my eye twitch. Do I think it's ever possible to do what they did in Jurassic Park? You mean have a really bad IT department, having one guy in charge of an island full of... I mean, kids, if you ever do want to run an island with dinosaurs, have more people in your admin. That's all I'm going to say. And that's why it failed, seriously. Do I think dinosaurs could ever be brought back? Yes. But not with the way you're asking me or telling me. So for those of you who haven't seen Jurassic Park, you're very, very lucky. No, I do like Jurassic Park, but it's a film. It's not educational. You can't take DNA from a dinosaur that died 66 million years ago. First of all, because I'm so pedantic, when a mosquito comes along, gone. Yep, it's flown along, it's had its food, it's bitten into a sauropod. First of all, you've got to bite through that. It's going to be really tough to bite through that, first of all, so it's going to be quite difficult. And secondly, because this is how much of a nerd I am, when mosquitoes draw blood and drink the blood, they only take red blood cells. Red blood cells don't have a nucleus, so there's no DNA in those red blood cells. Uh-oh, science. So even if you found one that was fresh, that had time traveled, and you're like, where have you been? Oh, I've just come from the Cretaceous. No, it still doesn't matter, because it's still got no DNA that's not his in there, or hers in there, because only the females that drink blood as well. So first of all, no. But actually, even if it could, if I could bend science and slightly change it, the DNA wouldn't last that long. So the oldest DNA we have of anywhere on the planet right now was done about 6 months ago by a mate of mine called Pete, who works in the Arctic, and he's extracted DNA from mammoths that lived in the Arctic just over 1 million years ago. They were in permafrost, so the oldest DNA that we can actively look at and say is still complete is 1 million years old. The second oldest is a horse that was, well, a horse relative that was 700,000 years old. So we can't do the DNA route. What we can do, though, this is cooler. What we can do is, when you were developing in your mum and you were a tiny little embryo, at one point, you might remember this, I don't know how good your memory is, you had a tail. Do you remember that? Does anyone remember having a tail? I thought you would then. I really genuinely thought you would. We had a tail, which gets reabsorbed. And then at another point, we have gills that get reabsorbed whilst in the uterus, in the womb, because it shows part of our evolutionary past. It shows, it's almost like a telltale footprint of where we've been through evolution and what we've changed from and into. But the same way those genes get switched on, our tail gets reabsorbed and our gills get reabsorbed, we see the same thing with chickens. Now, if anyone follows me on Twitter, you will know that I adore my chickens. I've got a whole flock of chickens that I pay a lot of money to make sure they're happy and healthy. And last week they went down with mycoplasma and I got very upset, so I had to make sure they're all safe. But chickens have been researched on in Chile, and you can switch the genes with chickens and other birds as well, but it's easy to work with chooks. And in the same way that we have a tail that gets reabsorbed and gills that get reabsorbed, when chicks and other bird embryos are developing in birds alive today, at some point, as the embryo is developing, they have a snout that appears with tiny little buds of teeth. Because the genes switch, it gets reabsorbed. They also have a little tail that comes out like a reptilian tail that gets switched and brought back. And they have these weird dinosaur-like feet that get switched off. Now, there's a team in Chile who have managed to switch the genes of the feet. So there are these little chickens that are coming right through to hatching stage with the feet of velociraptors. All I can say is I hope their IT department is up to scratch. And actually, this sounds mean, but they haven't got the ethics to actually hatch them. So they make sure they don't hatch. There is one person, I'm not sure if I can say this. Can I say this? You won't tell anyone, will you? I don't trust you in the slightest. But I'll tell you anyway, because I think he's written about this. Pretty certain he has. There's one person who is somewhere in the world, North America, who is trying to hatch chickens. It's all privately done. And he's trying to do the whole thing. He's trying to get a snout with teeth, with little claws and feet like a dinosaur, with a long reptilian tail that's still going to come out looking like a velociraptor, but going running towards you. But genetically, it'll still be a chicken. So we don't know what will happen yet. So by switching the genes of living animals, we think we can create hybrids, or these things that are half-half, but we don't know. But we can't use the DNA from Dippy, for example. We can do something slightly cooler in some ways, though, because the preservation of some dinosaurs is so good, including T-Rex. They've found bones where, if you found enough bones that you don't have to keep every one, you can do some funky stuff with them. And they actually drop them in baths of acid. So not only can you put things like ostriches on chicken treadmills, you can play with acid when you're a scientist. It's great. So they've been dropping these bones in acid that dissolves all the stone, the rock, and just leaves the soft tissue. And they've got cartilage from T-Rex that's 70-odd million years old. And within the cartilage, they actually found blood vessels that were still viable. So they actually found these complete blood vessels in these T-Rex fossils. And within the blood vessels, they found some red blood cells. Ah, but there's no DNA in them, remember? So there is some really cool soft tissue that you can play with in things like Rexy, but still we can never get the DNA back out of them. I know it's the longest answer to a question I've ever done, but I'm just terrified he's going to ask me another question. So. Any more questions? Sir, at the back. Absolutely. Oh, what a good question. Thank you. So the question was, can I tell you a little bit about eggs from different dinosaurs? Were they hatched like chickens, and were they in clutches? Yes, yes, and yes. We know, for example, that so when Sir David and I were in Argentina, he got to go to Chile. He gets all the photos from that guy. He got to go to Chile to see an amazing site by a guy called Luis Chapi, who has looked at these titanosaur nest sites, these big dinosaurs like Patagotitan. We don't know if this was from the same species or not, but we found these eggs, or they found these eggs, about, that's perfect. That's about the largest egg we know of from any titanosaur, which will be the largest dinosaur egg ever. But actually it's quite small compared to the largest egg ever, the elephant bird. So I spent best part of a year in Madagascar when I was much younger, and actually found a whole range of elephant bird eggs, a nesting site. And they only died out about 4,500 years ago. They're about that sort of size. So these, the biggest dinosaur eggs ever, were only about a third of the size of the biggest bird eggs ever. And what we have got is a really good evidence of young theropods, young sort of predatory dinosaurs, to know they put on massive amounts of weight really quickly. So T-Rex, for example, we know that across most of its first year was putting on 2 kilos a day. That's for kids, that's 2 bags of sugar a day in weight going on. We think that by the time this was about a year old, it would have been the weight of an elephant. So coming out the size of something absolutely no bigger than that, we say physically about the size of a kitten they were born. And to go from a kitten to the size of an elephant a year is massively accelerated growth. Think of that, anyone's got a kitten at home. But actually from a biology perspective, how you put that weight on and how you don't overload the bones, we don't really know how they can do that. So if anyone's got ex-battery hens, well, not battery, but ex-cage hens, we often see this when the chickens are fed too much, especially the broilers. The weight goes into their bones, they get metabolic bone disease and all these problems. We don't know how these really fast, accelerated growth rates were allowed or able to happen to the point where they didn't just collapse the skeleton. There's an area of ongoing research right now. We also know that the little sauropods, the ones that were hatching, had a tiny little egg tooth, just like chicks today, so they were just tapping, breaking their way out and getting out there. We also know, which is really lovely, that there was paternal and maternal care from some species of dinosaurs. There is one from North America called Maiasaurus, which means mother lizard, because we've found loads of eggs with mum or dad in association. And also in Mongolia, there's something called oviraptor, which was this, it was called oviraptor, it means egg thief or egg stealer. But actually it was nearly always found with this big bird, like turkey-like animal, but some of them were much, much taller than Dippy's head, actually. So imagine a turkey that size. Crouched over the eggs, and we interpret it as thieving and nest raiding. But actually, we now know that they were brooding. So we know they were brooding. We know they were caring for their young. Yeah, we're pretty certain that there was a lot of care going on, a lot of clutch management. In terms of shapes of theropod eggs, they would have been lozenge-shaped. So we know that T-Rex came out from an egg about that sort of size, like a house brick with the edges shaved off, really. It's an area of lots of ongoing research, and I can't say too much about it right now because I might be working on a project with that soon, but I'll tell you again in about a year's time. Yes? Oh, yes. So the question was, why don't we find skulls? When I was growing up, was walking along Yarmouth and Caister Beach looking for dead seals and porpoises. I was a very strange child. Very strange adult. I was a very strange child. My teachers were terrified of me as a kid. I always want to find skulls. I want to be the next Gerald Durrell and really finding things, but I nearly always found the heads had rolled off or had been smashed. So if you find a porpoise or a seal skull, for example, they're nearly always smashed in by birds, first of all. So the porpoises very distinctly have smash marks on the side. If they're in the water for a little bit longer, that beautiful articulation that allows you to do all this is rubbish for preservation because it pops off. And if predators come in, or scavengers come in, sorry, the first thing they'll do is go for the soft tissue or for the throat, the area around here, and the heads just come off. So like our skulls as well, it's not a single bone. So you've got, I can't remember how many bones are in there now? It's dozens. I think we've got 24, 25 in our skull and jaw. They've got around about the same, maybe a bit more. They disarticulate, so they fall to bits over the period of time. And whilst you've got things like these femurs and these humeri and even the vertebrae to some extent, you've got much thinner bone here. You've got lots of bones together, and it's an area that's not very well articulated, and it's an area that predators and scavengers just mess around with. So even looking at animals alive today, the bodies, that's always the bit that's missing, whereas we see the same thing with these, really. It's frustrating, but then you get things like Gallimiopus, which is absolutely tissue paper thin, beautifully preserved. So it all depends where they die, how they die. If they die in a bunch of mud and it's low oxygen and it preserves, it's really tough to find that. So remember that all these animals that have ever died, we see a fraction of 1% that hit good enough levels of preservation, and then we've got to find, so the chances of finding them are really slim as well. So I've worked on sites, and I've just come from a site this week, so I've been very busy the last few weeks at a very, very cool paleontology site somewhere in the UK that might be on TV in December, that's all I can say, on BBC One. Watch this space. With some very big animals. It's an amazing discovery, but actually, even though we know exactly where they are, there are bits that are here, there's some over there, there's some over there, there's some over there, and we don't know how they're spread out, because there weren't any predators that could do this to an animal this big, or a bunch of animals this big, that were that strong, and we know that it wasn't wind or water or floods. Bones just move. So even in Africa, elephant bones move as you get erosion, as you get floods and water just coming in, just separating them. So there's been experiments looking at elephants over 2 or 3 years, and the bones will just end up spread across like a tennis court area size, and even elephant skulls get trashed and smashed and broken up. Yes, madam. What have we learned about when the dinosaurs became warm-blooded? This is a really contentious question, and we don't know for a fact they were warm-blooded. The new idea, or the idea that seems to have most support, is they were something. So we're warm-blooded, but the better term is endothermic, which means we rely on our own body heat that we generate ourselves. So are birds, but these were, remember that birds are dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs weren't birds, if you see what I mean there. It's a slight cause and effect. So although they are one branch of them, so all birds are dinosaurs, not all dinosaurs are birds. So we think that part of the reason the Dromaeosaur group did really well and became the birds is because they were slightly different. So we think that switch that turned into the birds that did really well was about 65, 60, right at the cusp of when the asteroid struck. We got some really lovely evidence that just before we're starting to see some different behaviors. And that's not that I think we're seeing the evidence from then. I think that's just as far back as the evidence goes for now. Because what we're seeing more of is a quick lesson about warm, cold-blooded. Nothing's cold-blooded. Everything has warm blood, apart from like crabs and stuff, that's different. But anything with a backbone has warm blood. It depends how you warm them up. So you either generate your own heat and you warm them up, you're endothermic, or you rely on the environment to warm you up. It's ectothermic, it means outside heat. So a Komodo dragon has warm blood as well. It just means it's been heated up from the outside. We think that something like this size would have been too sluggish to have relied on ectothermic generated heat. But equally, we don't think it was endothermic. We think it was something called poikilothermic, which is in the middle. So there are some sharks, and tuna do this really well as well, where they're both cold-blooded, but they can really ramp their metabolism up really quickly. It's like a supercharge turbo boost, effectively. So most of the time, they will be cold-blooded, but when they need to, when they're both very quick swimming animals, they'll go up a gear. We think there was something similar going on with these. Now, they definitely weren't running around or going up a gear, but we think they could somehow harness an element of endothermy, but we don't know yet. We really don't know. So feathers, so the first feathers we know of go back 150 million years, and we think potentially the first feathers we know weren't for flying. They were too sparse, and we can see where they were. They were just sort of around the hips and this area. We think probably regulation, so to keep them warm, but in order to do that, that might have been an ectothermic species or a cold-blooded species that was just able to sit out in slightly cooler environments or stay out at nighttime, for example. So it might have been just a way to retain the heat generated by the outside world. It's really hard to ever consolidate or answer that argument because that completely relies on soft tissue. I don't think we'll ever get to the base of that. However, all the maths and all the stats that are done say that something that size, and especially something as big as Patagotitan, just couldn't rely on the heat. By the time it was warm enough, it would be time to go to sleep again. So it would, especially if you're eating a skipful of food a day, you need to go through that. You need to be able to fire the digestive system up as well, which needs to be working day and night. That needs to be completely working on that. So we don't understand. In the same way, we don't understand the hearts of these things either. So we used to say that something this size had a heart that was 2 tons. Where are you going to stick a 2-ton heart in there? You just physically can't. Instead, we think they may have had tiny little sub-hearts going up the neck, almost like extra little chambers. It makes sense. There's nothing like that today, but that's the only, in the models that have been done, that's the only thing that seems to be able to pump up blood up and down the body without a 2-ton heart that would completely collapse the animal. A lot of that is, it's not probablys, but it's working through models that we just don't know yet. We don't really understand how this poikilothermy works with many of the animals that use it today. So by looking again at the animals we have alive today, kind of works with working backwards. I've got time for one more. Oh, sorry. No, I haven't. I'll go on very quick on then. What's the question? How do I decide where to dig? Sometimes I decide. Not often. That's a really good question. How do I decide, or how do we decide where to dig? We know where we're digging because we know the land. We know that if you go to... Anyone been to West Runton? I hope kids get mum or dad or granny or granny to take you to West Runton. If not, it's basically abuse if they don't take you. West Runton's amazing, and you find some incredible stuff there. Because of the geology, I know it's Cretaceous, so I know there's nothing Jurassic there. I know that so first of all, I know that this didn't live anywhere outside North America. I also know it's from millions of years before the Cretaceous. So if I was looking for this, I would know, right, okay, when was this? So you kind of get an idea of the land. So we know the exact geology of the whole land. The Jurassic coast isn't just the only bit where you find Jurassic material just by chance. That's where the seams of Jurassic material are. We look at the geology of the land. So when you come up, that sort of curves all the way up north. If you look at East Anglia, you've got these really lovely chalk deposits and subsequent layers. That's Cretaceous. So by looking at geology, you know, but also a lot of it's trial and error. So the project I've been working on recently was a chance find by 2 amateur fossil hunters who came to me at a talk and said, we found, I nearly showed you with my hands what it was. Keep my hands together. We found this thing. What do you think? It's like, where did you find that? And so a lot of it is trial and error. Patagotitan was found by a farmer who lost his sheep. He was looking for them, who found the dog. He also lost his dog, who was looking for the lost sheep. And he found the dog standing on the exposed femur of Patagotitan. No, not at all. So most of the stuff that you would find, what can I say? I might be working, it's a whole different project, I don't care this one. I've got a Plesiosaur project on the go at the moment. So Plesiosaur, these big predatory marine reptiles from the Jurassic period that was 2 meters underground. I've also found things that are absolutely on the ground that are being exposed. It just depends where you are and what levels you're working in, but you get a sense of where to look. If you're looking, there are fossil deposits around Corton near Lowestoft for shark teeth. You even occasionally find megalodon teeth around Lowestoft and Corton Way. That's the only place in Britain you'll ever find them, but you find them maybe once every 2 or 3 years. If you go to West Runton, you find mammoth stuff on top of things like belemnites and ammonites, because you've got 2 very different deposits there. That's me done. Thank you so much.
Questions that he will want to engage with you. And so just on behalf of us Dinosaur a huge thank you for just the extraordinary amount of energy that you put into to your presentation, and it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure even our really clever children here tonight will have learned some new things. I'm sure us adults have learned an enormous amount. So thank you so much, and we wish you all the very best with all the research in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you do want a book, and listen, if you don't want one, fine. You get them at school, they're at school as well. If you do happen to want a book, they're over there for sale. I'll be signing books here as well. If you just have a question for me, come and have a chat with me as well, all right?